This is what national service used to look like.
This is something that affects the life of every man in Britain of military age.
Once again, your country needs you, according to Rishi Sunak.
So, first thing, no, I'm not sending everyone off to join the army. What I am doing is proposing a bold new model of national service for 18-year-olds. They'll be able to choose to spend 12 months in a full-time military commission or 1 weekend per month volunteering in roles within your local community.
And Mr Sunak says he's looking forward to his daughters doing national service. So could they end up in khaki?
The call to national service has gone forth.
Only 30,000 of the brightest and best would have military placements, according to the Conservatives. The rest would be expected to volunteer 25 days a year. The estimated cost, £2.5 billion a year, with a pilot scheme set to start in September next year. And there'll be sanctions of some sort for those who don't comply, but not prison.
Well, what we have seen recently is a fracturing, more and more young people particularly, not exclusively, but particularly living their lives in bubbles, isolated from their peers, mixing only with people from similar circles to their own. And what we want to do is find a way of bringing people together. It's a way of, binding us as a nation, as a society, investing in those young people and addressing this worrying trend towards fragmentation.
Maybe James Cleverly and the government ought to get out of their bubble and understand what happens down here in the real world.
A thumbs down from one Southampton fan at Wembley for the Championship playoff against Leeds today. He may support the same team as the Prime Minister, but that's where the similarities end. Other fans, though, welcomed the policy.
National service, not necessarily a bad thing to society and some people.
I think it's good for you to grow into an adult and learn a bit about life. I think it's good, yeah.
I think it incorporates values that you need to have that I think a lot of people don't have.
Hold on a minute, though. That didn't seem to be the government policy 3 days ago. In a written answer to a question about national service dated the 23rd of May, the Defence Minister, Andrew Morrison, said, "The government has no current plans to reintroduce national service. If potentially unwilling national service recruits were to be obliged to serve alongside the professional men and women of our armed forces, it could damage morale, recruitment and retention."
Isn't this a sign of panic that this is policy on the hoof?
No, not at all. This is what elections are for. Elections are for teasing out the real elements and the things that matter. The military were talking about a full-on military national service. That's what was being asked of them, and that is not what they would be getting. This is very different. This is national service in its principles, but a wider sense of what people can do with their communities.
Labour campaigning in Yorkshire dismissed the idea of national service out of hand.
It's an expensive gimmick. Again, the Conservatives are making pledges without any idea where the money is going to come from. That is deeply irresponsible. And with me as Chancellor, all of the policies that I put forward will always be fully costed and fully funded. I will never play fast and loose with the public finances.
We headed down to the battlefield and me and my bestie found this swing. We had so much fun. I had to take some Instagram pictures.
And it seems not all teenagers are taking the idea seriously.
Bogies! Hey, over here.
Targeting 18-year-olds comes with its own risks.
Jane Dodge reporting there. Well, earlier I spoke to Seb Payne, the director of Onward, a right-of-centre think tank, which recently published a paper in support of national service, and Naomi Smith, the CEO of Best for Britain, civil society campaign group, which began as an anti-Brexit organisation. I began by asking Seb Payne about the politics of today's announcement, coming days after a defence minister had said there were no plans to introduce national service.
Well, I think the idea of a bigger form of national service has been debated for some time, and the government obviously hasn't done anything about it right now. But when you look to election manifestos, it's good to see some big, bold ideas, because people often say the Conservatives are too narrow in their looking, and here's something that is big and could have a big impact on the rest of society.
Just, 3 days ago, no current plans to introduce national service. Current didn't last very long, did it?
No, well, obviously, the election has been pretty snap. I don't think anyone was expecting it to come as quickly as it did. So you wouldn't expect government ministers to be thinking about the election.
I mean, Naomi Smith, this is an idea now, today, that is completely dominating the agenda. It's a smart move, isn't it?
I don't think so. Young people in this country have been so let down by 14 years of this government. They're the first generation that aren't going to be as well off as their parents. They can barely afford rents, tuition fees are skyrocketing. If they're still at schools, there's a teacher crisis. And of course, parents and grandparents don't particularly want to see their children being sent off to do mandatory military service or the volunteering scheme. So I don't think it has landed well for the Conservatives. And of course, Labour, Liberal Democrats and Greens, on the other hand, are offering young people something very tangible.
Well, I think if you're going to judge how this landed by what people say on Twitter, that maybe not be wholly representative of who this policy is targeted to and the wider country. And ultimately, this is about trying to unlock the talent and potential of a younger generation who feel that, you know, are disconnected, unmoored and alienated from society.
Well, Seb talks about this being a Twitter issue. No, it absolutely isn't. When you look at what this government has done for young people, of course, one of the fundamental things it's done by pushing through its extremely hard form of Brexit has been to take away their opportunity to live, work, study across 27 other European countries visa-free. Young people don't need to have values of resilience instilled in them by a government that has been the most sleaze-ridden I can remember in my lifetime, that has had not one but two prime ministers who broke COVID lockdown rules and were fined because of it, a prime minister in Liz Truss who blamed everyone but herself for the problems of the day. If the party wants to encourage good behaviour in young people, it needs to start by adhering to the law, upholding the Nolan principles, and then people might take them seriously. But as things stand, this is not going to go anywhere near fixing the problems of generational inequality.
The numbers suggest there are a lot of young people who are locked out of employment and that they're disengaged.
Young people need opportunity. They need to be able to have good, well-paid jobs. And the system as it has been proposed today, as I've read it, is that you can either do the mandatory national service, for which military service, for which you would be paid, or you can do unpaid voluntary work 1 weekend a month. Now, there is a clear divide there in terms of which demographic young people will go towards each one. Well-off children who don't need to earn the money, who come from backgrounds where their families will be able to support them, will of course choose to do the mandatory volunteering 1 weekend a month, whereas those from poorer backgrounds will have no option.
Seb Payne, I mean, that is perfectly a valid assumption to make, isn't it?
Well, I mean, it's an assumption to say that it's going to be about low or high background people. I do think there's no actual basis. We know that yet. My think tank Onward has also found that 57% of younger generations find they are less patriotic than older generations as well. And 1 in 5 are economically inactive. And all those things need to be challenged through a wide range of policy things, be it through housing, being through a better economy, but having some kind of national service element to it, I think, is really important.
And Naomi Smith, in answer to the questions, I suppose, that Seb Payne and clearly the government are making at the moment about disenfranchised young people, you know, how do you envisage this working? Do you see any positives in it as an idea?
There is always something to be said for civic participation. And of course, for far too long, democracy has felt like something that is done to people rather than something that they do. I think if this announcement today is going to serve to do anything, it's going to be to encourage 18-year-olds to register to vote and turn out to vote.
Seb Payne, just on once again returning to the politics of this, you know, Nigel Farage, who is the sort of honorary president of Reform, says that this is the politics of a weak leader who basically has sent out a focus group to see what they could deliver for Reform voters and what else but national service, ticking all the boxes there.
We did polling and found that it commands broad support across all age groups, across all demographics, and including younger people as well. So what we're talking about here is something very modern, based in society where it is at the moment, and adapted to where British youngsters are now. And I think that, I don't think this has just come out of nowhere. This is a big idea. It's been carefully formed, engaged with think tanks over a good period of time. So I think the evidence just doesn't back up the fact that it's just come out of nowhere.
Naomi Smith, last word to you.
Well, most military leaders will tell you the last thing they want is a bunch of reluctant recruits that have been forced to be there. The government really hasn't spelled out how much this is properly going to cost, where the extra barracks are going to come from, how we're going to feed these recruits. All they've talked about is a 2.5 billion cost, 1.5 billion of it coming from the levelling up funds that were meant to replace the lost EU regional development funds. So clearly the government has decided to abandon the levelling up strategy with this, and that this is an ageist policy that is going to punish the young, to chase the votes of a very small number of older voters who almost certainly did not serve themselves, given that you had to have been 18 by 1960 to have done conscription before now.
Well, much more to talk about on this. It's clearly got everyone talking. Naomi Smith and Seb Payne, thank you so much for joining us.